Hello and welcome. This is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and we've got a brand new training series called Data Import Manager. We're going to show you how to import any data from any specific source. And of course, we're going to bring that data from any specific sheet. We're going to create a destination with an existing workbook or a brand new workbook with just a few clicks. We can then select on any specific sheet or have it on a new worksheet. We can then map the data simply with a click, and we can select a specific format for that data or choose to hide or show specific columns and simply import that data with Run Import. It's going to be a great training. Let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me. We've got a great training series. We're going to go over through this. It's probably going to be a 2 or 3 or so, depending upon your comments, your likes, your shares, and seeing what you want me to do with this. We've got a great start, so I want to get started on this and show you what we've got so far. Before I get to that, I hope that you have had a chance to subscribe. If not, go ahead and click the button below. Make sure you subscribe, and of course, hit the notifications on. We create these videos each and every Tuesday, so I hope you love them, where we take a deep dive into Excel and create amazing applications with some VBA and some creativity, and I'd love to see your creativities. Of course, if you haven't also questions, please join our Excel for Freelancers group. I'll include the links below. And if you like what we're doing here, we do this free each and every Tuesday, so if you'd like to support us, of course, I'd appreciate that. We've got some amazing applications, including a 100 Excel workbook for just $37. Of course, we also have the Ultimate Excel Resource Guide. That's 1,000 resources, including 100 free PDF Excel downloads. We also have the Excel Advanced Excel Dashboard Masterclass of 15 hours to create a single-click dashboard like you've never seen before. That's an amazing. We've got hundreds of students in that masterclass enjoying their course, as well as getting brand new freelance jobs as a result of it. All right, let's get started on the training today. Like I said, let's go over this just a little bit slower so we can see all the features of this data import manager. But before we do that, why would you want a data import manager when you can simply copy and paste data from one work or the other? Well, there's actually a lot of reasons. We may not want to copy the data exactly. We may want to copy it to specific worksheets. We may want to copy it from specific worksheets. We also may want to choose specific destinations, whether it's in a new workbook or an existing workbook. We may also want to choose to bring it into a specific sheet or perhaps a new sheet. We also may want to replace the existing data or add to the existing data. So there's a lot of options when we copy and paste. We also may want to start on a specific row or start on a specific column. When we map the data, we may also want to change the order in which these columns are set, so we can easily do that just with a few different selections. Of course, we may want to exclude certain columns or certain data that we don't want to import, and we also may want to change the format of that, so we can do that quickly and easily with this data import manager. So we can quickly change specific formats, and that's how we want it imported into. And so all we have to do is change those options here. We also have the ability to change different format types, and of course on the import summary, all we need to do is run the import, and then that data is going to be automatically updated here into the import. And we can do that on a brand new sheet or brand new workbook, or an existing sheet, I should say. All right, so we've got a lot to cover. We've also had a summary here, so we know what was imported. There's a lot of options here, and I think in the future we may automate this. And automate an import could be really good. Let's say you have a specific brand new file in a specific folder that you want added to a master workbook. Well, we may, in future versions, part 3 or part 4 or something, we may automate that so that that new data will automatically move into a master workbook with the specific columns you set, with the specific formats that you set on a specific sheet. So there's a lot of options here, and I want to go over those options and see just how we did this. This is going to be a multi-part series. Probably go into part 2 or part 3, depending upon your suggestions, your comments, and your ideas. I always make sure to answer each and every YouTube comment. Of course, also from our Excel for Freelancers group. So I always appreciate your feedback. And so you're a big part of this. So I do appreciate your continued likes and shares and following. All right. So basically, this is a four-step process here, where the first process, we're going to select the source data. And with this source data, we can select any source data. I've got some sample source data right here. And basically what that source data is just some products here on a product list. So we've got a product, just a short product list with let's say 19 or 18 different items, and it's just that include product type, purchase date, just some basic information. So what I want to do with this is I want to take this data and I want to put it into either another workbook or an existing workbook, and I may want to add to the current list, or I may want to replace the current list. So we've got a few options with that. So we're going to use this as our source. Now automatically our first row of data is going to be automatically generated. Our first column of data is going to be automatically generated. Our last row of data, we can adjust this, but it's automated automatically. And the number of columns is also automated based on the source data. So for example, if we were to change the source data, it would let us know if, for example, if we had another sheet, let's create some test data on another sheet just so we can see what that would look like. So we have this is our destination. We can close that right now. And we have our source right here. So this is our source. So we have sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. There's nothing here. But if we were to change sheets, let's copy this just for the sake of copying it and put it in sheet 1. And let's increase the column so we can put it in a different column. And we'll add to the rows. So let's say we have, all right. Okay, so now this particular table the data is going to be starting on row 4, and the column is column 3 or column C. So this particular sheet 1, we have our data there. So when we go back into our sheet and we select a different sheet, we'll see that the first row of data automatically updates to 4. The first column automatically updates to 3. The last row of data is 21 in the last column. So that updates based on the sheet. So that's going to help us. So when we go back to products, you'll see again it adjusts. So our data, our first row of data automatically adjusts. So I'm going to show you just how we did that, how we automate this. You can change it if you need to, but also if our data has headers, we can remove this or show this if our data has headers. And we've got some import details here, total columns and total rows. So we know what we're going to be importing. So that's really helpful, and we can adjust these in case we don't want to import certain details. All right, so we've got our source here, and then we've got our destination. Now we can create a brand new workbook. If we want to create a new workbook, we can just say test new, create a new file name, test new workbook. On that new workbook, we can choose what sheet we're going to be putting it on. Let's say we want to put it on sheet 2. And then we can click next. Pretty much easy. We can click new, and then we map the data. Mapping the data basically takes all of our source data here, and we've got the sample, we've got the source columns here, the column headers, we've got a sample data here, and then we've got the destination. Where do we want to put that? For example, let's say we want to put the product ID in column B, and we want to put the product types in column A. We can do that. Maybe we want to change here is our original format is in this month, day, and then year, but maybe we want to change that to something like this. So we can change the formats automatically, and maybe we want the markup to show decimals, so we can change that as well. All we need to do is we can change the order, we can change the format of our destination. That's pretty much it. And then we just move over here and we click run import, and all of our information is now in that brand new workbook. We have product types first, just as we said, product ID, so the order has switched. We've got a brand new format on the purchase date, and if we've got our markup percentages, it's going to show those decimals. So it's a really, really great feature. In this mapping step here, we also have the sample data here, and as we change this format here, our sample data changes as well, so we can see the result of that. So we know exactly what the result is going to look like as we change the format, so we can see them here. So it's a really nice feature. We'll be able to change the order, and this can be really, really powerful when you do a lot of importing. In fact, I want to automate this. We're not automating it on this step, but maybe in part 3 or part 4, we can automate this entire process. What I'm thinking about doing is having an option here that says automate this, or let's say schedule the automation, so that it selects from a certain source all the time and moves it to a specific basically what we would do is we would save all of these options in another table, and then we'd be able to automate that on a specific schedule every Tuesday, every day at 9 o'clock, every month on the 1st, or something like that. So I'm thinking about that. So let me know if you want that in the comments. I want you to comment and let me know what you want to see on this data. We're going to go over this. Is probably going to cover 2 different parts as far as going over this, because there's a lot of code in here, and I'm going to walk you step by step. In fact, the on sheet is pretty easy, but as far as the code, we're going to go over all the options. And you're going to learn some amazing Excel tricks, probably that you've never seen before, as we go over these features, like how to get the columns, how to get the formats, and things like that. So it's really going to be a powerful training, not just a powerful product for the Data Import Manager, but a powerful training as far as what you can do with Excel and expand your knowledge on the features and things that you can do with Excel, so that you can create these, even if you're not creating a data import manager, so that you can use these tricks and tools and tips in your applications, so that you can do better with your freelance jobs, or that you can create your own products, or you have a really bright future. So that's what I really want to see from you, to be able to create your own products, or to get more freelance jobs, or more successful or higher paid freelance jobs, and expand your knowledge base, so that you can really be a very, very powerful Excel developer. And that's what I really want for you. So how do we do this? Let's start out with the simple. Let's just start out on this basic tab. And how do we do this? Now, we've been through this before, but this is a little bit of a different way, and I like to show you different ways. And these are basically just shapes. So if we click on here, and of course those 4 shapes are in a group, and I've called this group button set. So basically, again, what we're doing here is we're just hiding and showing rows, not columns in this case, rows. So if you take a look at these row numbers, our first set is 5 to 22. Our second set is 23 to 40. And our third set is here, and I'll show you why in a second. Our third set is here, 41 to 58. Now, why did we skip that? Because map data theoretically could go on and on and on and on, right? So I wanted this to be the last. I wanted the map data because it's got a dynamic number of rows. So I wanted this to be the lower part, but you don't really see that in the code, because you hide it. So in fact, map data would go from 59 on forever, theoretically, depending upon how many columns you have. This is all dynamic. We use conditional formatting to show this table. So if we have a smaller data set, it's going to be smaller. So for example, if we have our source here, here's our source, and if we, let's say we remove, let's unmerge and center this so that we can remove a few columns here. If we delete these columns here, and our table only has 5 different columns on sheet 1, and then we import that, we can see that automatically our mapping is going to adjust based on that. So let's reselect the data, and then let's reselect sheet 1. Now we see the first row of data is on 4, and the first column of data is 3. So as we change those changes to the source table, we can see that automatically reflected inside the import manager automatically. So I'm going to show you how we did that and how we calculate all of that information through VBA. So it's going to be great. So we have that. So we have those tabs now. So let's see, how do we do these tabs here? So we're basically hiding and showing rows, along with hiding and showing these specific groups of shapes. So each group of shape we also hide. So for example, this group of shape I've called step 1 group, and it's basically an icon here. We've got a text here. We've got a button here. And we've got some icons here. We have a checkbox here actually, and we also have next button. So all of those specific shapes and checkboxes make up a group, and this group is called step 1 group. Now keep in mind, in Excel 2007 they don't often allow us to group checkboxes with shapes, but that's in 2010 and above. So if you're using an older version and you run into an issue, that's probably why they don't allow us to in older versions. Okay, so these specific groups are specific to each of the options. So this particular group is called step 2 group. So we're going to hide and show those groups, and make sure when you group or regroup a specific group that we always have to make sure the properties, when we go into size and properties, we want to make sure that the properties are always set move but don't size. We don't want to size this as we change the size of the columns or the rows. We want to make sure that that stays the same. So for each of those groups, and when you regroup those, you want to reset that often. And the same thing for the mapping. We also have a group here. This group is called step 3, the same one for step 4. We also have these buttons to go previous as well. And it's the same thing as the selecting the tab. So we have two options: to use the next buttons, or we have the ability to use the tabs up here at the top. So I'm going to show you just how we did that. All right, the first thing we want to do is move into the VBA, and we can do that through our Developers tab. We can also use a shortcut called Alt F11. We also have, if you don't have this Developers tab, you can get this Developers tab into the Options and Customize ribbon and make sure you select the Developers. That's going to get you the Developers tab. So into the VBA we go. We're going to start out, we've got 5 or 6 different modules here, and we have just a little bit of on-sheet code on our Data Import Manager. We have just a little bit of the on-sheet code. Our focus is going to be on the tabs macro module. That's where we're going to start out. Tabs macro module. That's a module that I've renamed called tabs macro. To rename your modules, you can also click in the properties window here and change the name right here. Now you want to make sure that the name of this module is not the same name as any macro. You want to make sure those are different. You don't want to have those. That's going to cause an issue. So you can rename your module from there. And we've got about 5 different macros inside this module. And the first thing what I want to do is with every single step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4, they all start out with a few different macros. The first thing I want to do is stop the calculations. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you'll know what this is, but if not, stop calculations is the macro that I run that basically turns off enabling events. It turns off calculations or sends that to manual, and of course screen updating to false. Now what this does is it makes it a lot quicker, and it removes the flashing that you often see when you click macros or you hide and show columns or rows. You get a little bit of flash, so this reset calculation and stop calculation macros help that. Now anytime we stop the calculation, we must also reset, because we don't want to run Excel without the events, without the calculations, or without screen updating, but it really helps inside the macro. So anytime you see that, you see stop calculation here, of course before that macro ends, you can also see reset calculation. And in between that, we have also another macro called reset hide steps. Reset hide step. Now this same macro is run for each of the tabs. And what does that do? Well, that's a macro right down here. And what I want to do is I want to hide everything all the way from 5 to 95. With sheet 1, we're going to be focused only on sheet 1 in this training. Sheet 1, everything happens on the same sheet, and that's called data import. In fact, let's go ahead and close that source out now so that we're just focused on one single workbook here, and then we can move on. All right, so now that we're focused on just this workbook here, this workbook, well, the only thing is the data import manager. We're not focused anything on 2 or 3, just one sheet. Everything happens on that one sheet, so it's always going to be with sheet 1. And with sheet 1, the first thing I want to do is I want to hide everything. I want to hide everything. Part of our macros is the first thing we want to do, so that means 5 all the way to 95. We're going to hide everything, right? Hide all the rows. And then what we're going to do is we're going to selectively unhide or display certain rows based on whatever tab we've selected. So the first thing we want to do is hide all groups. Remember those groups that we just discussed. That would be step group 1 or step group 2. I'm going to hide all of those as well. I want to hide those so that we can, it's easier to hide everything in one step and then show just what we need to do. So we're going to, the first thing this macro does, all it does is hide everything. So we're going to hide all the rows. We can do that starting selecting rows 5 to 95. The entire row hidden equals true. So we're going to hide all of those rows. I also want to reset all of the buttons to the dark blue color, and we can do that with just this button set. Remember, all buttons are part of a specific group, and that group is called button set. Let's take another look at that just so we can see. Here's the button set, and I've named it button set. And if you want to see all the shapes, we're going to click on our selection pane. I've got it here in a shortcut, but if you want to see it, we can click on the page layout tab and selection pane, and here you can see all of the step groups. And of course, our group is called button set here. Button set here, you can rename it here as well, and it's made up of step 1, step 2, and step 3. It's made up of just 4 specific buttons. And so that group, once I change the color to all of them, it's going to change them all to dark blue, and that's what I want. I want to change them all to the dark blue background. So we have that here. So we can change that using the RGB. This 215187 is the dark blue background. What I also want to do is I want to change the font to white. I want to make sure that they all have the font of white. You'll see the selected one's going to be in a black or dark blue, I believe. So what I want to do is I want to change every single button to white and every single button to the background of dark blue. We can do that with just those two lines of code. Shapes array, because it's an array, it's a group, and button set, all of the fill is going to get a 4 color of RGB 21, 51, and 87. That is the colors that we want for our specific dark blue background. And then of course we also want to give it the white, the font fill color of the text range of all of the buttons in that set. We're going to give it a white, and of course the white is 255, 255, and 255. That is the RGB for white. So all this does is change everything to a dark blue background and give it a white font. And the next step, all I want to do is hide all of the groups. We went over the groups, step 1 group, and those are all the groups of the specific shapes inside each individual tab. I want to hide them all with this step. The reason I want to hide them all is because then once we go to the step, I only have to unhide specific steps or specific rows to that group. So now that everything's hidden, now when we go back into, we've just hidden everything. Now all we have to do is take 4 lines of code to unhide what we want and or change the color. So again, we're going to take a specific button, step 1 button, only this button. We're going to give it a specific fill color, and that's the lighter blue, RGB 51, 204 to 255. That is going to give us our light blue color. And the next line of code is going to give us our black font. Our black font is going to give only for step 1 button, And that's going to give us a font fill color RGB of 000. That is the white font. So that way when we select a specific button, the black font. So that way when we select a specific button, it is going to give us our black font. 255, 255, 255, of course, is the white font, I should say. And then the 000 is the black font. So that way, when we select a specific one, it's going to give us the light blue background and the black font. Black font meaning 000, white font being 255. I just want to clear that up. So we got that right. All right, next up, what I want to do is I want to unhide the specific rows only for that group. 5 through 22 in the first one. And of course, we have our 23 through 40 in the second one, the third one 59 through 95, and the fourth one 41 through 58. So we're going to be unhiding those for each of those steps. And of course, also what I want to do is sheet 1, step 1 group, I want to unhide, I want to make that group visible. That's the group of shapes or buttons, or of course the checkboxes that are aligned with that specific step. So I want to unhide that. And last but not least, I want to reset the calculations. That is going to set the calculations to automatic, screen updating to true, and of course you'll remember we also have the enable events to true. All right, so we've gone through those. So basically step 2 is exactly the same, except we're unhiding different rows, we are unhiding different shape set, and we are setting colors differently for the specific shape. So that's all we have to do through step 3, step 4. That's how we get a great, it doesn't take a lot of macros, there isn't a lot of code to create a really great, fantastic tabbed effect. It's quite easy. That's going to give us our ability to just switch between tabs. Now, of course, I have also assigned those macros. So if we right click any specific shape and we click the assign macro, we'll see that this has been assigned to step 1, import step 1. This has been assigned to import step 2, and so on and so forth. Now, when we select the data source, we also have a next button here, next. This, of course, has been assigned to step 2. I'm going to click on the assign macro. It's a little bit off the screen, and when we click assign macro, we'll see that it's been assigned to import step 2. Whereas when I select the data, and when I select this, I guess, as you can probably guess, this has been assigned to import step 1. So when we right click, it's off the screen, sorry, and see the macro import step 1, and this has been assigned to import step 3. So all we have to do is create these buttons and assign a macro to them, import step 3. And that's what we've done it all along. So that's how we get our button set. Again, each one of those is assigned a specific macro based on the step that we want to go to. So we can see how we get this great little navigation. We can do the same thing. We can create the same with this effect, so we can select, or we can also use it down here with next and previous buttons. So that gives us a great navigation. And when you hide, when you hide the headings, it's really nice because you can really see, you don't have to see the column, so it's a really nice effect that you can see. All right, we do want to show, of course, those headings, but it's a nice effect when you hide those columns and hide everything. It gives it a really nice smooth look. All right, starting off, what's the first step in the select data? I want to select a data source, and to do that I want to select a specific workbook. For now we have this just as Excel, but maybe we're going to do CSV in the future. If I can get that working properly, we're going to give that a try. Right now I have, when we select data source, what I want to do is I've got XLSM, XLSS, and XLSB. We can easily add to that, and I'm going to show you how you can add to that. So the first macro that I want to show you is the ability to select a data source. So let's go into that and see just how we did that. Back into the VBA, we have a module called source macros, and this particular module is made up of just 2 macros. We have the browse for source, which I'm going to show you first, and then of course we have the get source data, and I'll show you what that's all about in just a moment. So the first macro is the browse for source. Now if we take a look at this button here, we click on assign macro, we can see that this button has been assigned to browse for source. That is the macro that's been assigned to that button, and that's the macro that we're going to go over right now. So the browse for source right here in the source module here, we've got to dimension a few things. The file folder as a file dialog, we're just going to use that as the file dialog. And of course the source path, I want to know the full path. What is the source path? In fact, that's going to be right here in E8. That is our full path. I want to determine that, so that's very important. And of course we also want to determine the worksheet, the source worksheet, I want to know that, and the source workbook. I want to define those, source worksheet as a worksheet, source workbook as a workbook, and the worksheet row as long. So, and the first thing I also want to do is I want to clear any older worksheets, A8 through A60. I want to clear that with sheet 1. What is that? Let me take a look at that. Now when we go into our columns A and B, we see some things. What I want to do is once I load this, I want a list of all the worksheets. So let's select the data source. Let's select this source here and update that. And what I want is I want to list all of the worksheets on that source. So I need to clear this list out so that I can list all the sheets. So we want to clear that list out because I want to have those sheets available in this drop down list, and I want that specific worksheet that we selected to show all of the worksheets in that workbook. So that is going to be a dynamic named range here, and I'll show you that in a moment, but I want to clear basically this list out. So when we selected, all the old worksheets get cleared out. All right, so moving on, so we know why we want to clear out A8 all the way through A60 all the way down here, just in case there's a lot of sheets. So we have that cleared out. So we want to clear any older source worksheets. That's very important because I want to list all the worksheets. I also want to clear various fields based on the worksheet. Remember, we have some information based on this source worksheet here. We have a file name. I want that. We have of course here, we have the rows. All of this data I want cleared out when we select a new worksheet because I want it updated. So when we select a brand new worksheet or workbook, I want it cleared out. So we can clear it out and then we can put in the new information once the new workbook is selected. So we're going to clear all the mapping data. Also mapping data, I want to clear that out as well. Mapping is based on a source data. So here's our mapping. So when we select map data, there might be some map data in here. I want to clear that out too, because that is also based, a lot of it, on the source and the destination workbook. So we want to clear that out starting in D65 and all the way down as far as it may go. So we want to clear out this mapping data. So that's important. This also has to do with mapping data. So we want to clear that out as well. So mapping data is going to be cleared out because it's going to be renewed each time we click this mapping data. So we want to do that. And we can do that with just this line of code. A and 65, these are based on our mapping data. D through 60 to L165, this is all based on our mapping data. So I want to clear that out as well. Clear import summary message. There's a message when we have a brand new import, just telling you a summary right here when we run an import, and we'll see a message here that says import has successfully been completed, 18 book on sheet 3. So we have our information here. I want to clear out this, so when we delete it, it's gone, and so we see that it's automatically gone, and that's conditional formatting. I'll show you that. So I want to clear out E47 through I53. That's a message, that's a summary of what's been imported, so I want to clear that out. All right, moving on in our code, we also want to delete any data validation. Now, data validation I65 through J165, what is that? That is our map data summary. There's data validations here. Right here, it's already, like, for example, we have a validation for months, and of course when we select a different type of format, that validation is going to change automatically based on whatever format that we've selected. So if we want a time, then we're going to have different time formats. So we want to make sure that this data validation here, or any data validation, is cleared out from I65 all the way down. I want to clear that out because it's dynamic validation based on whatever formats are here, and of course those formats are also based on the source. So for example, if we have a purchase date, here, we're going to have a date validation here. So it's all going to be based on the format. So we just basically, what I want to say is I want to clear any data validation. This is a data validation. I want to just remove that. So that's important. So we're going to clear that out. And of course, we're going to reset the mapping. And I'll show you this. We want the reset mapping. When we reset the mapping, I don't want to map unless we have a source and a column. We want to make sure that the mapping data is only done once we have a specific destination, once we have a specific source. So if we don't have those, we need to reset something. We can't map data unless we have a specific workbook or something. So that just helps us, and I'll show you that why. So we're just going to set mapping to incomplete. That's going to help us, and I'll go over that. The worksheet row, we're going to set the initial worksheet row to 8. Why do we do that? Well, I want to go through all of the worksheets on our source. I want to go through all of the worksheets. So I want to set the first row to put our first worksheet on row 8. And as we go through all of the worksheets in the workbook, I want to list the names of those worksheets right here. So the first row is 8. So our initial worksheet row is going to be 8. That's why we set it there. We're going to set the file folder to application, file dialog, MSO file picker. We're picking a specific file, so we're going to set it. That's going to launch this browser. What does that do? Well, what that does is when we click on our specific data, it launches this specific dialog, this select source file. We've given it a name called select source file, and also with this specific file dialog, it allows us to set a format to here. So that's what that does. It launches that specific file dialog, and then with the file folder, we're going to give it a title, just what I showed you, that title, select source file. And then of course I want to set specific file types, only specific. I don't want all file types. I want Excel files. We may add CSV onto this in the future. So for now, it's just Excel files, XLSM, XLSS, XLS, but you can add there are other Excel file types. You can add that as well. So in fact, we could probably add XLS to this, XLS. So let's do that, comma. So we'll put the start, meaning and the start, dot XLS. So we also want that to XLS. Older versions would work just fine in this. So now when we select the data source, we can see that we also have XLS here, XLS. It remembers the old version, so when we click it again, it's going to remember XLS. So now we have XLS as an option too, which is kind of nice. All right, so you see we can change that dynamically, automatically through the code by selecting the file types. The filters here will do that. And then, of course, if show does not equal -1, what that means is if the user has pressed cancel, they have not selected anything. I want to skip this step and go all the way to no selection, all the way down here, just in case they've canceled out, just like I've done there. We don't want to continue on to any steps if the user has pressed canceled. What is the cancel? That would be right here. If I click here and then I click cancel, we have not selected anything. So we want to skip all of that code in case the user has canceled out of that. Back into the code we go, assuming that they have selected them. We're going to get a selected item. Selected item is item that the user has selected. What do I want to put there? I want to put that selected item in sheet 1, range E8. That is the full file path right in E8. E8. Let's close out some of these other workbooks. We don't need them now. And we'll focus just on that source file. So E8 is where that entire file path will go. So we put that right there, and that line of code will help us. I want to put that in a variable. Source file path is equal to E8. Source file path is our variable, our string variable that we've defined right here. And next up, what I want to do is I want to put the file name. What is the file name? We have the file path. I want the file name here. Data test source XLSX. That is the file name. I want to put that in E9. So we can do that with this line of code. E9 equals the directory. It's going to pull the file name. We want the VB directory of the file path. So it's going to take this entire file path. It's going to pull the file name directly from it using directory source file path, comma, VB directory. And it's going to put that in E9. That will help us in the future. It also makes it look good so we know exactly, in case it's a really long, let's say your file path is just really long, it's off here, at least we know exactly what file name we've selected. So that's important. The next thing what I want to do in the code is I want to create a list of all of the sheets, So when we select that, and let's not cancel out of that now, let's select a source and click OK. What I want is all of the sheets in that workbook to appear right here. Then I've done is I've created a dynamic named range, and I've put that dynamic name range right here. What is that? Let's click on the data validation, click on the data validation, and you see, click yes, it's a merge cell, so we get that source worksheet list. Now what is that source worksheet list? When we go back into the formulas name manager and we look at source worksheet list and we tab over, we see that this is a dynamic named range using offset. And I've started in to create this, I've started in A7. Why do I create A7 when A7 is actually the title? We don't want to include A7, so why have I created it here? Well, the reason is if there's no data, I don't want there to be an error. So we do this, we start with the header, and then we offset it one row down, offset one row down. So we actually started in A8, but we include A7 so that there's no errors when there's actually no data or no sheets. And then what we're going to do is we're going to count. Also, we're going to count using A7, except that the total count of cells with text from A7 to A36, we're going to count all those and then we're going to subtract 1. We subtract 1 because we've started with the header row. Again, we started with the header row because in case there's no data, it's not going to create any error, or if it was deleted. So that helps us prevent errors by including the header and then subtracting 1. We are going to use this just one column here for our offset. So that is going to get us the count. So when we tab into it, tab out of it, we'll see that the dancing ants are around just those 4 sheets from A8 through A11, and we get those sheets through VBA, and I'm going to show you how we get all of the sheets in the workbook and display them right on here. So back into the VBA code, we're going to first open the workbook. I want to open the source workbook. We can do that with this line of code. Workbook open, source file path open. I want the workbook open so that I can get all the worksheets in the workbook. We're going to set the source workbook. This is the workbook. We've dimensioned this as a workbook here, as a workbook, source workbook as a workbook. And then what I want to do is I want to set the source workbooks to the directory of the source file path. That's just going to set our workbook. We use that so now we can work with it. We can work with this. So what I want to do is I want to determine every sheet in that workbook. We've already set source worksheet WS as a worksheet here. Source work, so we know it's a worksheet. So what do I want to do with every single worksheet in this workbook.worksheets? So we're focused on the worksheet. We're focused on every single worksheet in this workbook. What do I want to do with that? I want to put the name in A and the worksheet row. So we're going to use a for next loop, for next, and with this for next, or actually a for each, for every single worksheet in the workbook, I want to do something. What I want to do, I want to take the name of that worksheet and I want to put it in A and the worksheet row. Now for each one, we're going to increase the worksheet row so that they don't overwrite each other. So it's not all A worksheet row starts at 8 and then it moves down. For every one, we move down one row, incrementing one row down. So that way, for every single sheet we get. So here, it's going to start out at 8. The products is the first sheet. Then it's going to go to sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. And we see in our data source, we have 4 worksheets: products, sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. So I want to list that. If I were to create a brand new one and call it test 4, and we reset that workbook, it's going to automatically include that. Of course, I have to save it. It's going to automatically include that. So now when I select the data source and I click the source, it's going to list that 4th sheet. Now we have test 4 here. So now we also can pull from test 4 sheet if we want. If there's data here, we would pull that. Right now we'll keep it products because that's where we have the data. So automatically it's going to pull all of the sheets in that workbook and put them right here. We're going to do the same thing with the destination in the future. All right, so next up, what do I want to do? So we've got all the worksheets. Let's go through the macro. And now what I want to do is I want to set the initial sheet. Now we've gone through every single, I just want to set the initial sheet. The first sheet, I want to make sure in I9 is the first sheet. What does that mean? Well, I want to take whatever is here, whatever is A8, and I want to put it right here in I9, right here in I9. Whatever the first sheet is, I want to put it right here. In this case, it's products, because often it's going to be just perhaps one sheet in a workbook. So I just want to set the default to make it easier for the user so that whatever the first sheet is the first sheet that's going to be here. Of course, they can choose different sheets, but we're going to have it on products. So that sets the initial default sheet to the first sheet in the workbook and puts it in I9 right there. All right, and then that's it. That's it with the macro. So now what do I want to do? Now what I want to do is I want to get some information. I want to put the information. I want to default. I don't want to force the user to put what the first row of data is. I don't want to force the user to figure out what the first column of data or the last row. So I want to use VBA to do all of that. And now take a look at this. I also want to list the last column of data. And if it's 8 or 9 or whatever, I do want to have the user to be able to automate that. But also look at that. You see that column I just changed. Click here. I want to know what column is, because sometimes we see column 8. Well, I don't know what column is that. Is it H? Is it 9? I want to know the column. I want to know it so that when I look on the source data, I want to know that column H is the last row of data. I want to know I only want to know it's column 8, but I also want to know the letter. So how do we get the letter? How do we get that letter? How do we take the number and get the letter? Well, that's great. We can use the address. Let's walk through this. We know a few things, right? We know it's column 8. So how do we get this specific column H to do that? Well, I'll show you. For example, if we use the address equals the address of a specific cell, we know we can start out with the row number, the column number. So for example, the address of A1, 1, comma 1, and then of course absolute. We can, in fact, I want to know relative. Absolute would use the dollar signs, relative would use without the dollar signs. So relative, and of course A1, I want A1 style. What is this going to get us? That is going to get us A1, right? So if I know that the address will give us A1, but I don't want A, what I really want is I want to know the column. If I know, so for example, what if it's 8? What if it's 8? What if the column number here is 8? That is H1. Okay, great. So I can take 8 and I can get H1. But now I really want H. I don't want the 1. So how do I get rid of the 1? Well, we can use the substitute to remove the 1. So we can use substitute. And what is the text? And what is the old text? Well, we know the old text is 1. And what is the new text? The new text is going to be just empty. So I want to remove that 1. I only want H. So we use the address, the substitute in the address, so all I want is H. Now what if I want to add the word column in front of it and parentheses. So all I would need to do is equals column, and then actually the beginning parentheses, and then the quotation mark, and so we have all that information, and then we know we have the 1, we know we have the H, so then I'm going to do and again, and then I'm going to do quotation marks, end parentheses, and then end quotation marks here. And that is going to get us the column H. And that's that's the same exact formula that I've used here. And of course, all I've done is taken an if error and I've wrapped it in if error. If there's an error, I want a blank. So here, it's amazing. We can use the address and the substitute to extract the column, the letter column letter from a specific column number, just like that. All right, so that is exactly how we've done that there. And we do the same thing in the destination, column A. So as we change this number, it changes automatically. And I've used the same exact formula. If there's getting the address from there, in fact, from there, and then substituting the 1 for nothing, for blank, and then just wrapping it in the text, so we can automatically extract the column. And that's really helpful to look at that, so we know automatically what column it is. So I thought that would be helpful, so I've added that. All right, so that's how we get the column. But now how do we get this information here? So how do we get it? As soon as we select another sheet, it's automatically going to say 0, 0. Or how do we get the products? Well, we do that through VBA code. And so what I want to do is I want something to run. As soon as we make a change to I8, I want something to happen. Now, when we make a change event on sheet, that's when we want something to happen. So how do we do that? So back into the VBA code, and here we have our sheet, our on sheet macros. Now we're making a change. Worksheet change. We're making a change to worksheet, not a selection change, but an actual change. And what are we changing? We're changing something to I9. If not intersect target is nothing. Remember, when you have not and nothing, it cancel the other out. So that means if we are making a change to I9, then do something. When you see nothing and not, it's very confusing. Just get rid of those, and when you're in your head, just think if we are making a change to I9, then something. What do we want to do? Then I want to run a macro called get source data. And what I want to do is I want to get the workbook data, the table data, the source information on worksheet change. So now we're going to look at this particular macro called get source data, and that's also, of course, in our source macros. We already went over the browse for source, and the only other macro located in this module is called get source data. And we're going to determine a few things. We need to also get the source file path on that. We also need the source sheet name, the source workbook, and the import workbook. The import workbook is the current workbook that we're working in, the import workbook. I also want to dimension the worksheet row as long. It's going to be a whole number. The first row, the table row, and the table column. We're going to define those as long. We're going to use those inside the code. The first column, the last row, and the last column. I need all of those as variables, so that's very important. Now, the first thing I want to do is I just want to set the import workbook to the current workbook. That would be this workbook right here. This workbook, the one we're working on, I want to set that up automatically to the current workbook, so we can define different workbooks. So we're working with multiple workbooks, so it's important that we know what is the current workbook that we're on. All right. Back into the code. With sheet 1, all the work that we're doing is with sheet 1, so we're always going to use with sheet 1, and let's hide that and just want to make sure you end it with a end with. Okay, so with sheet 1, what are we going to do? The first thing I want to do is determine the source file path. That's an E8. E8. This is our source file path right here, E8. That's the entire path of our source workbook. So back into the code, we want to define that. I also want to set the source workbook equal to workbooks directory source function. And all that's going to do is set the workbook to the source so we know it. And I want to determine the name, the sheet name. Remember, the sheet name is going to be a string variable called source sheet name, and that's in I9. Remember, we put that when the user selects a specific sheet, we wanted to put that into a variable. So with sheet 1, that's important, so we need to do that. With the source workbook sheet name. Now we're focused on the source workbooks and the specific sheet name. What is that? That, of course, would be here with our source workbook here, and with this, in this case, it's product. So we're focused only on this source table, this sheet, this workbook, the source. What are we going to do with that? With the source workbook sheet name, we're going to do a few things. We're going to be working with this source. What is that source? That is this right here. So with the specific source, with the specific product, this sheet, we're going to be working with this. So what I want to do is I want to determine the last row of data. I want to determine the first row of data, the first row. In fact, this is going to be sheet 2. I also want to determine the last column and the first column. So I want to get all of those variables, and I want to put them all in these fields right here. So how do we do that? All right, back into the code we go. The last row is going to be what? I want to find the last row of data. We're going to use find. And of course, we're focused on this sheet. So the cells after range 8A1, we're going to look in the part. We're going to look in all formulas. We're going to search by rows, search direction previous. We're going to match case. That's not important. We're going to focus on the row. What do I want? I want the last row. So in this case, the last row is going to be 2020. So when we reset and update this, we'll see that automatically when we reset and run that macro, I just did a few tests, and we see that it's automatically set back to 20. And the first row of data is 3. And so how do we get that information? Well, the first thing I want to do is I also want to get the last column. We're going to look in all the information. The last column is going to be finding. Use that same find, look in, but except this time we're looking for the column. We're using find. We're searching for anything, any type of text, looking for any type of text, anything that might be in a cell, and it's going to be the last column of data. So if, for example, the last column is currently 8, but what if we add some text in there? If I just add one text here and here, the last column's automatically going to update to 9. So when I rerun this macro, we're going to see that this changed to 9 automatically because it's looking for the last column, All right, so we can remove that in there. We can remove that. All right, so we can remove that here. So we clear our data. And the same thing for row. If we were to add something right in here and we automatically update that, we just run the macro again just by selecting products once again, we're going to see that the last row now changes to 21. Okay, so now we know how we get the last row and how we get the last data column, but how do we get the first row and the first data? We're going to use just a little bit of a math for that. What I want to do is I want to determine the first row of the table with 70% of the cells filled. 70%, I'm going to use that as our test. For example, this, if we have 5 different columns and we have just one field full, it's going to be just 20%. So I'm looking for something that's got at least 70%. Something like this has every single field filled in. So this would be 100%. So it's going to use that. So the first row of data, of course, would be, in this case, 3. Why 3? Because our data has headers, so we're going to skip one down. So determine the first row. We're going to run a loop from row 1 all the way to the last row. We've already determined the last row here. So we can determine a loop. So what I want to do is I want to run a loop in our source, starting with 1 all the way to the end, and determine which of the cells have at least 70% of the fields filled. Which row has 70% filled? We're going to determine that as our first row of either data or our first header row, either one. I need to know both. So depending upon if the user has selected data has headers or not, so we're going to use that. So if it doesn't have headers, of course, and the user selects products, this is going to change to 2, right? Because there was no headers. But in our case, we do have headers. So when we update the products list here, we'll see it change back to 3. All right, moving on in our code. So we're going to run this loop, and what are we looking for? I want to count the number of values in a specific range, and if that count is greater than 70%, then we're going to determine the first row. How do we count that? We're going to use count A, the same formula that we would use inside a range inside our Excel, the same function. We can use application worksheet function count A. So what is the range? What is the range of cells? Well, in this case, basically for whatever row. So we're going to count all the cells in this range, all of the cells in this range, and we're just going to keep going down until we have 70%. For example, if I were to insert a row here and just put one value, and we know that that's not 70%. So when we go back into our data manager, we run the macro again simply by changing this. We're going to see that that automatically updates now to 4 because this particular number of cells doesn't have 70% full. So we can delete that now. All right, so we see, but this one does. 2 does, and of course it's the header row, so we're going to add 1. So we can do that with this code here. Application, we're counting. What are we counting? We're going to use whatever row we're on, starting in column 1, all the way to the last column with the same row. This right here is our range. First column to the last column in whatever table row. We're going to run through the loop. The table row is going to change. Now, if we divide that by the last column, we can determine if they're all filled, it's going to be 100%. So if we make that division to the last column, it's going to be 100. If they're all filled, it's going to be 100%. In that case, it would be greater than 0.7. And in that case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to create the first row is equal to the table row. So whatever the table row is on, we want to make that the first row. And we're done with the loop. We're going to exit out of that loop. As soon as we find a range where the number of filled cells is greater than 70%, greater than or equal to, then we're going to exit 4. So that determines our first row of data, or header row, either way. All right, next up we're going to do pretty much the same thing with the column. What I want to do is a column, I want to run through all the columns here, and I want to find a column that, in this case, we'll do 50%. So for example, if we insert, okay, right now we are at column 1, right? Column 1 is our first column of data. However, if we insert, and then we insert again, and I just enter a few values in here, we're not at 50%. We're not at 50%, meaning we have a total of, for example, 19 different rows, but only, let's say, 2 or maybe just 10% is filled. It's not 50%. So that would not constitute the first column of the data. So when we go back into this and we rerun that macro, once again, just by reselecting it, we'll now see the first column of data is 3. Why is it 3? Because 50% of the values are not. So I'm just making a safe assumption. And of course, users can change this, right? But we're trying to use AI to figure out exactly what the first column. We're trying to determine what the first column is using some science, using some math. So as long as they're not 50%, we can determine that the first row is 3. So we can delete this now. We get the idea. We can use that in the same formula. So we're going to loop through all the way through column 1 to the last column, and we're going to count all the values. And if it's not 50% of the total, we're going to assume that it's not the first column of data. In fact, you can use 20%, you can use 30%, you can adjust this to whatever, number is. So basically this time we're going to use table columns, starting with the first row, going to the last row, and we're going to go through each column, determine which column has more than 50%. You can change this to 10% or 5%, depending upon your data structure, or you can have it just over 0, anything over 0%. You can do it if you have blank. So it gives you can adjust this number based on that. So as we loop through, we're going to determine what the first column is, and we're going to set that whatever the table column is, then we're going to exit the 4. So we're going to use the same logic to determine our first row of data and determine our first column of data. So that's going to help. So then we know for sure All right, now we're done. We're done with the specific source name. We're done with this with the source. We've determined all the variables we need. We determined the last row, we determined the last column, we've also determined the first row, and we've determined the first column. Those 4 variables we've already determined, so we're done. And now, of course, if we just have to determine one more thing, I need to know one more thing. I need to know if the data has headers or not, because if the data does have headers, then when we update this product, we need to know that it's going to be row 2. If it does have headers, then it's going to be 3. So that's all we need to do. And we created a checkbox here. This specific checkbox is just a checkbox format. If we're going to create another check, that is add insert, we would just insert the form controls checkbox here. So all that is the checkbox. Now, if you'll notice, I don't really like the font of the existing checkbox. So I've actually left the font blank. I've left the text blank. And you see this checkbox has no text according to it. This text actually comes from the cell text because I want all of the text to match exactly. I want the fonts exactly the same, the sizes and everything. So I've taken out any text in the checkbox and just put it over here. And of course, this text box is assigned to a specific cell. So when we click Format Control, we'll see that the cell link is A6, and A6 is true. So A6 goes from here, true or false. So if it's false, that means our data doesn't have headers. If it's true, our data does have headers. So we can use that. So now in our code, if A6 equals true, then what I want to do is I want to add one row, our first row of data. I want to know the first row of data. I don't want to know the headers. So the first row of data, we're just going to add 1. So that's how we determine that. Now we're ready to put all the information into the cells. So from F12, I12, F13, and I13, all we're going to do is take all that information and enter it into our fields. So for example, here we have our first row of data here in 3. We have our first column in F13. We have our last in I12. That is our last row of data, and of our last data column in I13. So we have all that information in here. All right, so we've got that. Now all we want to do is I want to have our import details. I want to know the total import rows. That's just simple math. We're going to say J12 minus F12 plus 1. J12 minus F12. So all that is here is our total import rows is our last row of data here minus our first row of data here. And of course, we have to add 1 for that, and that is 19. So we get our total 19. All right, so we have that total import rows. Now I want to know the total import columns, and that, of course, exactly is our last data column minus our first data column plus 1. That gives us our total import columns. So we've got our total import rows, our total import columns. That is how we get all of the source information. So we've gone over all the source information, how we create a source file, how we get the information, how we use AI to determine the first row of data and the last row of data, as well as the first column and the last data. So that's how we get our source information. All right, we've covered a lot in this training. We've covered how to change the colors and change the look of the tabs. We have covered how to get to browse for a specific source and how to pull that information and how to check data headers. We've covered a lot in this import part 1. Part 2, we're going to focus on the destination and perhaps if we get to it, the mapping. So I can't wait. Of course, if you want to see this file in its entirety, just go ahead and click the links below in the description. I'll make sure to include the full file into there so you can download it and test it out and play with yourself. I always appreciate your comments, your likes, and your shares. So make sure you go ahead and put them down below because I want to hear from you and know what you think of this and how you can use this in your work each and every day. All right, thanks for joining me on this Data Import Manager Part 1. We'll see you next week for Part 2. Thanks so much. Have a great day.